Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Riki Stamps, Director of Programs and Events, and here I am again with a wonderful resident interview. I'm so thrilled to be talking to Bettie Lou Lancaster, who has been a resident since 2009. And Bettie Lou has been a name among Fayetteville people for so many years with her ties to the university and the League of Women Voters. But we want to get into a little more of Bettie Lou's life. She's had a very exciting and interesting life and living various places across the country in her years. So please help me welcome Bettie Lou. Hi, sweet. How are you?
Hello.
I appreciate you doing this. We were just talking before we started recording about when I came to visit you at your village home and kind of get some preempted questions, you know, ready and everything. And you were talking about how much fun it was to just be able to talk to somebody during these COVID days. And
Yes.
It was a pleasure visiting with you yesterday. You have a beautiful village home. And so what I wanted to do, Bettie Lou, is just start out with, like I do with most of our guests, and I just want to learn about your life. And I would love to start with where I understand you were born and raised, and that is in the great state of Oklahoma. Who thinks that they're better than Arkansas? But
Never, never, never.
Well, tell us about your early days in Oklahoma.
Well, I grew up in Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm.
My father was a lawyer, and my mother was a typical stay-at-home mother. That's what mothers did in those days.
Did your mother, did you tell me she taught?
No, she didn't.
So she was at home with you?
She was at home. She had a master's in English, but she...
Oh, okay, so she
but
didn't.
she never taught.
I see.
She helped my father set up his law practice, and worked in his office some, but otherwise she was at home.
I remember you telling me when you were a very young child, you have a few memories of what we all know as the Dust Bowl and that treacherous time in Oklahoma.
Oh yes, yes. When I was little, I remember Model T Fords with mattresses on top, headed for California.
Oh my goodness!
And I remember as a first grader having to put a wet handkerchief over my mouth when I walked to school because it was so dusty.
Wow. I can't even imagine. You see movies like The Grapes of Wrath, and you can't. It's just hard to even imagine being there unless you were.
Well, of course, the Western Oklahoma was the center of the Dust Bowl.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm so glad that you managed through that, and your family managed through that, I'm assuming. One little interesting note that Bettie Lou shared with me about her mother is she definitely has Native American in her family. So tell us a little snippet about that.
I'm an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation, and through my mother. My mother was born in Indian Territory. She was born just a few months before it became a state, so her birth certificate says Muskogee IT for Indian Territory.
I love that. I love that. Of course, you can't see it as well as I can, but Bettie Lou has beautiful legs and beautiful skin in general, and I'm sure she has not been in a tanning bed or laying out in the sun. It just comes natural.
Well,
Well, I have always noticed Bettie Lou, when things are normal at Butterfield, she is a very dedicated fitness person in our pool. You love our pool.
Oh, I love the water aerobics. I really miss the water aerobics.
Well, we're hoping that gets back up and running really soon, for sure. I know we're anxious to get back in the pool.
But I'm enjoying all the other classes that Jennifer's doing, and this is an opportunity to try all the classes that I wouldn't have gone to otherwise.
Absolutely, yeah. So you grew up in Oklahoma City and decided you wanted to further your education. Your parents were very educated and they supported you in this. So kind of take us through your academic accomplishments.
Well, I spent my first 2 years of college at Wellesley College in suburbs of Boston.
Okay.
And then my family insisted that I come back to the University of Oklahoma because that's where I would meet my lifelong friends, since I was going to live in Oklahoma the rest of my life.
Okay.
And so I finished up at the University of Oklahoma, got a degree in economics, and then I promptly moved to New York and worked in New York City and married a New Yorker. So.
Well, yes, she makes that just so married a New Yorker, but it was the love of her life. And tell me about how you met your husband, Bill.
Well, I met him at a wedding party in Short Hills, New Jersey, but he was then a Wall Street lawyer. And so we went back to Oklahoma City to get married, but lived in New York City and then in the New York suburbs in Long Island.
So being from Arkansas and loving my times I've spent in the big cities, I'm not so sure I would feel that comfortable living there. Tell me how you adjusted, a young lady from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, to the Big Apple.
Well, I loved it, and through Wellesley, I had a lot of friends who had gone to New York at the same time, and through the Wellesley Club, I met a wonderful roommate, and we found an apartment in Greenwich Village.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Greenwich Village was fun in those days.
I believe also your desire to understand the political process came quite early in your life in New York City.
Yes. I joined the Riverdale branch of the New York City League. New York City had about 5 different branches of the league that were very active in New York in those days. And the league always studies an issue very carefully before they, and if they reach consensus on an issue, then they actively support it. And so the league was a very important part of my life. Well, I joined right after I got married, and from the rest of my life, really.
Well, but it seems from the stories you told me yesterday that this was not only a very important organization that women were supporting in very different chapters and everything else, but it was almost like a social event. I mean, you really came together.
Oh, absolutely. And it was wonderful when I was living in the Long Island suburbs with a new baby and feeling very isolated. Well, I could have a league committee meeting in my living room while I had a sick child in the bedroom.
Very convenient.
It was an ideal thing to be doing.
So you also shared you worked for an ad agency.
Yes, before I was married, I worked for McCann Erickson in the AP building. We could look down on the Rockettes practicing on the roof of Radio City Music Hall from our office.
Neat. So did you do artistic work? Or
No, I was in personnel.
In personnel, okay.
Yeah.
That's so interesting, and I know it was such an exciting time to be in New York.
It was fun. It was fun.
And safe. I'm sure fairly safe.
Yeah.
Compared to now.
Well, I'm not sure it's changed that much.
Yeah. So after New York, I understand that you and Bill decided to go to Washington. Tell us about those years.
Well, he went to work for the Internal Revenue Service. He had gone into tax law, and if you're going to be a tax lawyer, you have to go to Washington and write the laws and the regulations, and you have a 4-year commitment. So we had 4 years in Washington. I loved Washington because so much of the business of Washington is handled in social situations. So you don't feel the sort of isolation you do out in the suburbs while the men are all in the city doing their work.
Oh, I see. So it was
a very active group of women. And Smith College had a program where they sent professors down, so I was able to take graduate courses in history and English through Smith College, living in Washington, D.C.
And you had both children at this time, or all 3?
Yes, the first 2 were born in Long Island, and they were in school in Washington.
Tell us real quickly about your 3 children.
Well, I have 3 boys, 2 born in Long Island and 1 born in Washington, D.C. And the oldest is a lawyer in Long Island. And the middle son lives in Madison, Wisconsin. And the youngest is a geology professor at Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. So they stretch from coast to coast.
And all 3 have furthered their education, no doubt, and I'm sure you're very, very proud of them. Absolutely. Oh, yes. So you were in Washington, and at the time you were you had your boys, and you were being active in the league. What are some other things you were involved in, and from there lead us into the decision to come to Fayetteville?
Well, after my husband's commitment with the IRS was ending, he wanted to go into teaching and decided that the law school at Fayetteville was a really good opportunity. So we moved to Fayetteville, Arkansas. Never thought I would. I'd driven across Arkansas, but I really didn't know Arkansas at all.
Well, and Bettie Lou was telling me about his choice his preference would be to teach here, but I think Bill was very concerned that you would not like living in Arkansas. So tell us some things he did to kind of massage that decision along.
Well, the Dean Barnhart of the law school happened to be in Washington, so he came and called on us and did a selling job, and a very good selling job. I really liked him and thought, well, if he's typical of what's at the law school, I will like it there. And then he sent me out house hunting. And
by yourself?
Yeah, well, he had looked at some things while he was here interviewing, but he wanted my final approval before we moved here. And I really liked the people here. I liked the people I met, and
so where was your first home?
Well, I loved the house. It was a Dale Holland house on Lake Lucille, up in the woods.
Oh, how beautiful.
It was a wonderful house. It was the kind of house we had always wanted. I think maybe the house sold them in Fayetteville as much as the law school.
And you lived there for many years, I'm sure.
Yeah, we lived there until I moved here.
Awesome. So I know that Bill passed away in the mid...
He died in 87.
87, the mid-80s. And at that time, you... well, let me back up just a little bit. During your decision to move to Fayetteville, you realized there was someone that had ties to New York that happened to also be living in Fayetteville.
One of my husband's very best friends from college was a protege of a law professor who sort of invented Indian law. And when Bill told him he was moving to Fayetteville, he said, "Oh, Felix Cohn's little girl lives there." And so I called Felix Cohn's little girl, who was Jean Treywazer, and we got together in Washington. She was home visiting her parents, and then she was very helpful here when I was house hunting, and it was through Kurt, her husband, that I found out about a program in the political science department. It was a federal grant to train teachers. The idea was that you would get a master's. I got get a master's in either political science or history. There were 6 of us from each discipline, and then also get the equivalent of a master's in education in a 2-year program. And so that's how I got into teaching political science.
Into teaching political science. Yeah. That's awesome. And Kurt and Jean, I mean, they're just right here at Butterfield. I think that's very sweet that you've been friends for all these many years, and I'm sure you get together and have some nostalgic times and giggles and laughs with them, and I think it's great that y'all are residents here at Butterfield together. And so you were at the university, And how many years did you teach?
Well, I taught off and on for many years. You know, sometimes I was teaching, sometimes I wasn't. Sometimes I was full-time, sometimes I was part-time. I was always an adjunct.
Okay.
And then when Bill did a visitorship at Rutgers, I taught for a year at Seton Hall, and I taught for 2 years at John Brown, and I taught 1 year when he was Fulbright in China. I taught American government in China.
In China, that's awesome. That is just, I love it. But you were only there for what, a year?
Yes, it was a 1 year Fulbright. He was teaching U.S. income tax in China.
Wow.
And international business transactions. And I was lecturing on American government and teaching English listening and speaking skills to the PhD candidates. They had all studied a lot of English, but they hadn't done much speaking with native speakers. So
how is your Chinese?
Non-existent.
Non-existent. Mine too.
I thought, no, I could speak enough to get into trouble. I could speak enough to shop. You know,
right.
How much, too much, and I would finally negotiate, and then they'd say something to me, and I'd go absolutely blank. I didn't have a clue what they were saying.
But what an experience. Another wonderful place to live. What city were you in?
We were in Wuhan.
Wuhan. I thought I remembered that.
Yeah, nobody had ever heard of Wuhan until recently.
No, and everyone knows where it is now,
Yes,
for
yes.
sure. Great memories of that. So in conjunction with working at the university, one of the most interesting things I want to talk about is your interest in what is known as Partners of the Americas and your relationship with South America, particularly Bolivia. So give us a little education on that.
Well, Partners was a wonderful organization. It was an outgrowth of President Kennedy's Alliance for Progress. He felt we needed more connections with South America. And so every country or part of country in South America was partnered with a state or a part of state in the United States. And Arkansas was partnered with East Bolivia. And then they had a lot of exchanges. It worked both ways. We sent experts down there. We sent our symphony conductor. We sent the head of the libraries. There was a very active farmer-to-farmer program where agri professors went down and a lot of agricultural exchanges. One of the artists at the university who painted that wonderful mural on the balcony of the Walton Arts Center went down to work with a muralist in Bolivia. So it was very much a two-way exchange, but there were some years when the big push was to promote democracy. In the early 90s, they were beginning to come out of some of the strongest dictatorships, and the State Department was a way of helping them promote democracy was to, well, I went down and talked to them about the various ways they were promoting democracy, and then they sent people up here to find ways that we promote democracy. They were principally sending women for, some of the ways we promote democracy are so ingrained that we don't even think of them. One of the women said, "Oh, you have student councils." Well, we could set up student councils. I mean, we don't think of student councils as being ways that we promote democracy, but of course it is.
Well, it's the young people learning about our democratic
society. Yes, I mean, we start out in kindergarten, you know, with setting up elections. We elect our presidents. We all learn the proper procedures. then there was a program to encourage women to get involved in politics in Bolivia, and so women came up, and I, took them around to introduce them to women who were in elective office in Arkansas, introduced them to, took them down to the state legislature to see how our legislature worked, and introduced them to the women who were in elective office.
Were they like sponges? Did they want to know and they wanted to learn?
Oh yes, mm-hmm. Yes. And we stayed in each other's homes, which was really nice. I would. One of the last times I was in one of the homes in Santa Cruz, and she was showing me pictures that she had taken in my home when she stayed with me.
Uh-huh.
And
so some of them did travel to Arkansas.
Oh yes, it was very.
Okay.
For instance, one of the women in Trinidad was a obstetrician, and she was beginning to get very tired of delivering second and third babies to 15-year-olds, and she sent a group of nurses up to learn ways that we developed sex education. Just try to.
Very important.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you were visiting South America, and for how long?
Well, during the 90s and the early 21st century, I guess I made about 5 trips to Bolivia, and then there would be international meetings where everybody from both continents would get together, and so we had meetings in Ecuador and Bolivia, also Bolivia, but Brazil, Guatemala, Argentina, and then sometimes I would just stop off in Peru or Chile on my way to either La Paz or Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz was the main city in our partnership, but since La Paz was the capital, we also spent a lot of time there.
The Partners of the Americas is still an organization. I Googled it the other day. They're still active.
They're still active, and there is an active chapter in Fayetteville. There are not as many exchanges as there used to be. Mm-hmm. Used to be a lot of exchanges.
I think it's a very important organization. It's a way to connect our countries and our international world. And I think it's a wonderful thing that it's been going for this many years.
Well, we've developed such a close relationship with Bolivia that now Bolivian students get in-state tuition at the university.
And there are several international students through the Spring Language Center from Bolivia.
Yes.
And when we have our international student lunches and conversational English times together, there usually is always a student from Bolivia, and they're
Oh yes, there are always a lot of students from Bolivia. They're
very happy students, seem to be happy, and I don't know, it's really great to get to know them.
And we're educating some of their leaders. I know one day I had lunch in Santa Cruz with a woman and said her husband had just been appointed Minister of Finance for the country, and when I got to the airplane, her son was on the plane coming up to visit his girlfriend at the University of Arkansas.
Oh my goodness. So when did you retire from the university?
Well, I haven't taught there in probably about 15 years.
Are you associated at all with any of them? No. Well, I know that there are several residents that you've known through the university.
Oh, yes.
Tell us some of the residents that you were with throughout the years working at the university. John King,
goodness.
I think, was one.
What?
John King.
Well, that was when I was teaching. When I had an alternative school, and John sent me interns to work with the kids in the alternative school.
Okay, what were the years of these schools? And if you don't mind, there's there were 2 pilot programs in Fayetteville that Bettie Lou was a part of. Tell us a little bit about those.
Well, first was Uptown School, and Carmen Lyerly, who had been principal at Woodland Junior High, and Martha Agee, who had been a counselor, established what they called Uptown School. It was in a derelict old building that belonged to the school district just off Dixon Street. And these were kids that just simply couldn't make it in the public schools. They had just a lot of problems. And, you know, kids who would have been dropouts, but by having an alternative program, you could
They could find a trade or something.
Yeah. Well, they could get their courses. I mean, volunteers came in and taught math and English. I taught I volunteered to teach American government. I think Ellen Compton, I think at one time taught them some Western Civ. It was a very casual atmosphere, which made them feel comfortable, and never any more than 25 or 30 students in the whole school. And then after I had been volunteering there for a few years, we found out that there was a crime commission project and we could establish another school that would include the whole county as a crime prevention through the Arkansas Crime Commission as crime prevention. And so we had federal money for 5 years. We established, wrote a grant and established a school. And
what was the name of this school?
We called it Pit Stop.
Pit Stop.
P-I-T for putting it together. and in a way, it was a wonderful way to teach. We had a house on the corner of Dixon and Lafayette, so we were close to the university, so the university kids could come over and volunteer. And we had a big front yard with a volleyball court and a basketball hoop. And when the natives got restless, I could just say, okay, everybody out on the volleyball court, get that energy out on the volleyball court so you can come in and settle down and do some learning. It was wonderful to have that kind of flexibility. And we had teachers come in and teaching all kinds of things. I mean, there would be a volunteer who was a reading specialist who could come in and work with the kids who were having trouble reading. There were volunteers getting masters at the university who could come in and do art projects for art education. We needed a lot of math tutors. We had a crime commission grant to put in a library of books, and they were books that had been chosen because they were popular with kids, and we weren't allowed to test them on them, and we weren't allowed to dictate what they read. It was just, here are these books, help yourself. And so every day, everything stopped, and if it was important for the kids to be reading, in order to emphasize that reading was important, the staff, the secretary, the director, everybody stopped, and for 30 minutes we sat and read. If it was important for them, it was important for us.
I think that's a wonderful teaching practice, and I know that both of those programs had to really benefit the young people of Fayetteville in the day. And I'm assuming they both have dissolved and other programs have taken its place.
The Pit Stop program ran out of money. The feds quit giving money. And so we only lasted 5 years. But the Uptown program is its remnants are at what was West Campus. First it went over to West Campus.
I see.
And now it's in that West Campus building, and it's the A.G. Lyerly Center named for Carmen Liley and Martha Agee.
I see.
And so there still is a program. It's not exactly the same program, but they still do have a program for kids who need something a little out of the ordinary.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful civic organizations, Bettie Lou, and I'm so glad you were involved with that. You mentioned Ellen Compton's name, and of course Ellen is synonymous with her commitment to taking care of our state and our natural surroundings, and many are very well that her father, Neil Compton, helped save the buffalo. You yourself have been a strong supporter of environmental organizations in Northwest Arkansas, and I honestly didn't mean to do this, but I left a letter on my desk that I was going to read, but Bettie Lou penned a wonderful letter to the powers that be back when they were trying to keep the hog farm from being established next to the Buffalo River. Not the removal years later, but the initial settling in of the hog farm. And it was very well written. And I know many of you residents as well were supportive through that campaign to keep hog farmers out once they established the one farm, getting them kicked out. And it worked. And I appreciate all your efforts in that as well.
Yeah, it's still important. I sent something off yesterday. Just please don't allow CAFO's CAFO, which is, I've forgotten what CAFO stands for, but that's what these animal factories are.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell us why you have such a passion for the buffalo.
Well, all you have to do is see the buffalo.
I know.
One of my sons through the Boys Club had been on the buffalo and took us over there, and it was just sort of wow. And so canoeing on the buffalo is just one of the wonderful advantages of living in Arkansas. And the Ozark Society every year had a 5-day float. We went from 5 days on the buffalo.
So you actually, ladies and gentlemen, Bettie Lou is a professional canoeer, right?
Well,
all I want to know, were you in the front or the back of the canoe? Or the middle?
Both. Both, yeah.
I can remember going floating a couple of times with my parents, and all my mom could do was, I was in the front of the boat, and all she could say is, "We're going to hit the rock. We're going to hit the rock."
I know. No.
You have to really kind of be prepared and know what you're doing when you're on the buffalo. Yeah. But it is an absolute national and state treasure, and we're so lucky that people like Ellen and you have been supportive behind it. It's just like when anything in our world is really good, it's always somebody there that wants to change it. And sometimes things just need to be left alone, and that is definitely one of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, after you moved to Butterfield Trail Village in 2009, you just delved right into life here on our beautiful campus, and you have served as a resident representative on the Butterfield Trail Village Board of Directors, and you are currently the chair of the Legislative Liaison Committee, and we appreciate that as well.
Well, thank you.
Tell us what was your desire to get involved in that way?
Well, you see something needs to be done, and you get in and you try to do it. Do what you can.
That is so true, and I believe you have done that very well. In our conversation yesterday, I asked, for some reason, Roosevelt came up, and I asked if you had ever heard Eleanor Roosevelt.
Oh, well, I did hear her speak once when we were living in Riverdale, and part of New York. She came to speak, so I did get to hear her once.
Which must have been an amazing moment for you.
Yes, yes.
Well, with your your heartfelt concern for our country's democracy and political system without getting into parties and any of that conversation. Tell us, who have you admired most in your life?
Oh my.
In politics that you feel like we could use about 20 of that person right now?
Oh my, oh my. Well, Arkansas has sent some real stars. Dale Bumpers.
Agreed.
David Pryor. Bill Clinton. You know, when we had Bumpers and Pryor in Congress, we had stars. I mean, they were so good, and they've done so much.
They have definitely put Arkansas in the forefront in many ways. We're very, very proud of their legacies for our state.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if there were someone that you would classify in your personal life as a role model, who would that be?
Oh my, that's really difficult.
You mentioned a couple of names yesterday.
Well, I did a lot of traveling with Louise Kramer, who's long gone now, and oh my.
There was one other name, and I'm sorry I can't remember who you mentioned. Was Louise Kramer someone at the university, or?
Yes, she was a zoology professor.
Ah, okay.
And if she had realized how little I know about zoology and other sciences, she would have been horrified.
Well, you obviously had some personal role models. Just in our conversations from your parents, they seem to be very, their education and making your way seemed to be something that they did for you.
Well, there were people who later moved to Butterfield Trail. I think that's one reason I just always assumed I would move to Butterfield Trail. There were people like Judy Fowler and Elaine McNeil and Peg Anderson
and you and Peg were involved in League of Women Voters together.
Yes.
Butterfield hosted several League of Women Voter events back in the day when Peg was at the helm. And then also, since your involvement, we've held events in the lodge. And what I've loved as the program director and having the access of League is to bring the defined information of a bill or something that's going to be on the ballot, and it's, you know, a 15,000 word bill, and it makes no sense. And when you have someone from the League explain it, and to say if you check yes, you're really saying no, that sort of thing, which seems to be a trickery we have quite a bit in our democracy, but it has helped so much to bring that educated information to residents before they go to the polls.
Oh yeah, it makes such a difference if you understand what it's about. Mm-hmm. And that's how I went to my first League meeting. My husband said, well, go to that League meeting, find out how we should vote on that issue.
How we should vote, yeah. Oh, well, you have to be educated. It's your duty to vote. But don't just vote to mark something just to say you did. You should be educated on what you're voting on.
Oh, it's such a mistake not to know what you're voting for. Mm-hmm. I've had to learn, if I don't really know something about a candidate, just don't vote for that. Mm-hmm. I remember one time, the last time, and I really realized this, I was just about to, well, there's a name I've heard of, I'll vote for that person. And then I said, no, I guess I better not. And when I got home and looked that person up, said I would not have wanted to vote for that person. It was just that I had heard the name, and I think that too often you do that. You just...
Well, and I'm personally, I'm guilty. I work like many Americans. You work hard all day. You've watched ads on the television, which is not the way to learn about a candidate, but you're hurried. And you want to vote, and you get to the polls right before they close because you worked all day, and it's easy to pick a name, and you're not actually sure what their platform is.
Yes, it really is important to find out about the candidates.
And you know,
might end up voting for somebody who was going to put in some things that you just really don't approve of.
Right. Well, I hope I can say this without offending anybody, but I wish the League of Women Voters could get behind our country and do away with parties, and let's just all be Americans and vote for the person who's going to do the best job. That would be my dream for my children and grandchildren.
Well,
it's you know, party affiliation has been around forever, though, and it probably won't go anywhere.
It's not going to go away.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate the League because they can keep us educated, informed on the issues of the day. And we do have elections coming up this fall, and we all need to be prepared. So if social distancing is no longer an issue in the fall, maybe you can encourage someone from the League to come and share information.
Yes, yes.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah, it would be nice maybe to have some of the candidates come just so we could get to know.
Well, Bettie Lou, I want to thank you so much for being my guest today.
Well, thank you.
You're a delightful person, and you've been so many wonderful places, and I am just excited you're a resident of Butterfield Trail Village. You bring so much to the table, and we appreciate you very much.
Well, Riki, you know, having been so isolated, just having a chance to come and talk to somebody has been a great privilege.
And there you go. So if you really need to talk to somebody, call me and we'll schedule an interview.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much again, Bettie Lou.
Thank you,
Ladies
Riki.
and gentlemen, you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.